Well, when we say we are inside politics, we really mean we're inside politics because today we go all the way into Parliament where we are joined by our good friend, Dr. Mmusi Maimane, leader of Build One South Africa, and currently speaking to us from Parliament. Mmusi, welcome back to the show. Good to speak to you again.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike. And certainly it has been a busy calendar, but it's great to be back on here with you.
Yeah, well, Mmusi, lot to talk about, and the first thing first, I saw an article that you wrote that ended up in the media, and talking about how ineffectual our parliamentary, our political process is. That even if you want to, as a member of parliament, get something heard, it's almost impossible. Just talk us through the key points, how this problem actually manifests.
Firstly, Mike, when we talk about parliamentary oversight, South Africa made a massive transition by saying that the executive would be held accountable in parliament. And that was significant post apartheid. It was an opportunity where the constitutional framework said that the president must come to parliament, must account. It is parliament who appoints the president. It is parliament who can remove the president. And effectively, by that, it's a broader conversation about holding ministers accountable, etc. The framework is designed in such a way that the president only has to come to parliament 4 times a year. That's outside state of the nation, so we set that aside. And in those 4 times, the president effectively gets 6 questions, which they get ahead of time. And then they come in literally for less than, cumulatively over the year, less than 10 hours to answer questions in a whole year. Now, I don't know how much you can do in 10 hours, but it's clear the fact that it's not a lot. Because ultimately, even if you ask the question, the quality of the answer is very subjective to the president. Parliament can't even determine that. So if the president says, I will answer you from the page 35 of the U magazine, and that's what the president believes to be the correct answer, then that's the answer you are given. And that's what you must live with. And this is at odds with, perhaps maybe if you think about other countries where, for example, if you went to the UK, there's prime minister's questions that happens every Wednesday. The prime minister has to come and answer questions, and some of them are unprepared so that you can get real interaction with them. It's at odds with other spaces where not only you've got to come here more regularly, there must be an ad hoc committee or a committee that is established over the president. Now, in South Africa, for example, in Gauteng, you've got a parliamentary committee that deals with the office of the premier. In South Africa, we don't have a parliamentary committee that deals with the president. So, in essence, for the president, who's not a member of parliament, he does not need to come to parliament at all, except those prescribed times, which is 4 times a year. And when the deputy president and the president comes in for the same amount of time, that whole office of the presidency is genuinely, in all fairness, not accountable to anybody.
And when you've got a president and a deputy president like we've got, where they're both on the run, it's a question of like, which country are they in next? Because the one answer for sure it isn't is South Africa. Seems to be that both of them spend a heck of a lot of time in places where the media and the public are far friendlier to them. You also point out the good old answer of "I agree." I really love that one. That's kind of a great answer. Explain why I agree. Such a great way just to end the discussion.
I mean, I think every time I've asked questions, even particularly to a deputy president, or often the answer is met with the famous line, no, honorable member, we totally agree. Which, if you could say to them, we think the schools are in a total mess, the deputy president will say, no, I totally agree with you. And then you'd say to them, but the policing is dysfunctional. No, we agree. And it almost feels as though the executive acts as commentators to the game rather than actual players. There isn't a sense upon which they come into the field going, we are the players, you, if you like, are the referees. So if you say there's a problem with policing, there must be an urgent plan that says, let's go fix the police, this is what we are going to do, or this is what we have done. Instead, it gets met with the commentariat, yeah, sure, we think the country is also facing some difficulty. So we all agree. And it's this collegial sense, which some of it is a feature of 70% of parliament being GNU driven, but some of it is a feature of the fact that we often have political leadership that sometimes when you become envious of other countries, where if there's a problem, the president or the leadership arrives with say, here's what we think we're going to solve it. We may get it wrong along the way, but here's the action we're taking. Instead of setting up these long-winded commissions and all sorts of things that make us feel as though we are being process-led rather than leadership-led. And that's why answers like we agree and page 94 of the U magazine suffice. Because in essence, there isn't the activism that fires up any leader to say, look, if you think there's a problem with police, I'm going to call the Minister of Police, and in next week I will write back to you formally to tell you what we've done. There isn't any of that urgency.
It seems to me that part of the problem is that in democratic systems, a lot is almost expected. It's hard to legislate good behavior. And the systems are vulnerable for somebody who wants to come in and abuse the system. We see Donald Trump not going to sit in Congress much, but he'll give an interview, on his plane every 5 minutes. I was watching a thing recently about Silvio Berlusconi that turned Italian democracy on its head by creating almost an autocracy. You need somebody, even the British system could be corrupted if somebody decided not to pitch up every week for that debate. It's what the voters will allow, isn't it?
Part of it is in fact that your last point is opposite in that this is reliant on the fact that if you don't do your job, the voters will vote you out. Except voters get a 5-year opportunity to express their view. In between all of that, they ask their representatives to go and represent them in parliament. And the dilemma with where that can go wrong, it is a bit of a different one to compare us to the US because the US directly votes for the president, which already helps the system in that if the president is directly elected by the people, the president is effectively accountable to the people. That's why he will give a press briefing from his plane and from wherever, because that's the people who have voted for him. In our case, the president is voted by parliament. And so for the president to not be able to engage parliament properly, to me, that is a greater crime, even beyond what democracy can do, because we should have a committee that gives oversight to the president. We shouldn't be spending all our days in these commissions. Parliament must be able to make decisions that are binding on people, that are able to have consequence, real consequence. But except at this point in time, our parliament has suffered from this fundamental problem. When the ANC was enjoying its massive majority, what that eventually meant is that the ANC, in the ANC, to be in parliament, you have to be higher up on the NEC's list. So when you're on the NEC's list and you are top, you become a minister, and if you are number one, you become the president, and number two, become the deputy, etc. So that mirrors that situation. But to become like a chairperson or a member of parliament, you are lower down the list. So what happens is that the ANC's ministers come to parliament, they listen to people who are lower than them on the list, and then they look at those people almost to say to them, if you give me a hard time here, the actual power sits at the party headquarters. When we go back to the party headquarters, I will deal with you there. So the accountability framework is then almost upended. It's a bit like a military general coming to report to a corporal in one setting. Of course, we all know that when they go back to the base, the general is in charge and the general will deal with the corporal. So you find that has seeped into parliament to a point where ultimately the next iteration is that not only do I believe we need a direct election of the president, I do think because of our system as such as it is, once you are elected speaker of the National Assembly, you almost need to resign your party membership so that, and it must be guaranteed that you'll be speaker for 5 years, so that when the president comes in, you don't feel like you are dealing with party politics, but rather you are dealing with accountability.
Yeah, or perhaps make a rule that the speaker is not from the ruling party at all, that it gets appointed by the opposition.
Absolutely.
That happens with Scopa, and it works.
We've had that a couple of times before, and I think to really prize accountability, as I think we were speaking now, South Africa's biggest challenge is that it's an accountability-free zone. Whether you're a motorist who gets behind the car and you think you are accumulating fines, the ARTO legislation has now been postponed till next year. So in essence, if you were to break enough fines, you could literally keep on keeping on. No one is going to take away your license. And so you could be a reckless driver, but that law, I can remember working on that law when I was councillor in the city of Joburg in 2011, and it hasn't been implemented in it can only begin in 2026. So motorists have no accountability. If you commit a murder in this country, your probability of getting a conviction is 1 in 5, which means you've got an 80% chance of getting away with murder. If you've got other problems of the law, you can't get a court hearing between now and 2029 in Johannesburg because our courts have become so clogged up. Our politicians, there's not a single one. You would swear we don't have a corruption problem. Not a single politician has ended up in jail. I envy the fact that in other jurisdictions, whether it's France, etc., sometimes prisoners have to stand up when the president walks in. So there's something to be welcomed about that. But in South Africa, that never happens. And when it did happen, when President Zuma was held accountable, there were profound riots that took place. So if you create that lack of accountability framework in all of society, I can assure you, whether you're a civil servant, an ordinary citizen, it doesn't matter. You will live in a world where you believe strongly that actually I can do as I please and no one will do anything to me.
Yeah, and we're seeing that come out in those commissions of inquiry. But I'd like to change tack quickly because, Mmusi, you sit on the finance committee. We recently heard from the Minister of Finance. He delivered his medium-term budget statement. What did you make of it? I mean, it was great to see something go through without the drama of the last time. There seemed to be a lot more cooperation and collaboration in getting to this statement. I know it isn't the budget, but it was not the show that it ended up the last time.
I mean, let me make this point, and I won't belabor it. Suffice to say, South Africa has done 31 years of doing more or less the same. What South Africa must think about is for its next 31 years, it can't do more or less the same. We need to hit the reset button and create an economic plan that is different to what we've always done. And the reason I say that is because, if you are budgeting for Johannesburg, you can't assume Johannesburg is the city of gold. There isn't a mine in Johannesburg per se. In that sense, the mining activities are different. And for South Africa, we need to rethink how we do the budget. And so for me, it feels like tinkering of more of the same, but in essence, trying to achieve something that needs an extraordinary effort and extraordinary courageous decision making. So I say that to say, here's some of the good things maybe in that frame. If you're going to do more of the same, here's some of the good things. I think it's good that they're digitizing. We made a call for them to digitize the procurement system, which they've done. I do think it's a good thing that South Africa has been taken off the grey list, whilst some of the cynics might say that wasn't it the same party that got us into the grey listing that wants to be celebrated to taking us out of the grey listing? But I think it's a good thing for South Africa to have to be off the grey list, and it may be a good thing for institutions like Moody's and others to be able to upgrade our status. I think that'll be good for capital. So there are some, from a stability point of view, the reduction, or at least having a budget surplus, is a positive development. That means that in some ways, expenditure isn't growing faster than revenue. And the collection by SARS, these are positive things that have happened. The second, which is a bit of a tricky area, is the inflation target at 3%. Now, we've always had a monetary policy that says that inflation targeting is between, I think if I'm not mistaken, 3 to 6% as a band with which we work. To make it simple so that this doesn't become like a macroeconomics lecture, is that you use that to determine not only inflation, or you gauge inflation, but you determine interest rates. Now, here is the bit that is interesting about that, is that when the South African Reserve Bank made the inflation target to be 3%, they're coming out of a global suppressed inflation and interest rates cultures that are declining. I'm not sure it has taken into full cognizance the South African economy and context. So the first thing is that in South Africa, more than 40% of the tax is paid by people who earn just over R1 million. So those are a significant tax component. You might call them maybe the middle, or the middle to upper class of society. They are the rump of tax contributions. For those citizens, inflation for them isn't driven by demand. It is driven by administered cost or supply. So for them, they are watching electricity go up. They are watching petrol go up. They are watching themselves having to pay higher for their kids' school fees because allocation to education in quintile 4 and 5 has declined. So in essence, they'll be paying more for school fees. They will end up in a space where, for many of them, they are already purchasing private security, so they don't have a benefit of the police, etc. And if we pass NHI progressively, they will lose their tax credits from claiming back for medical aid. So it is, if you like, milking the cow that's giving you milk. The problem is, once the cow develops wings and it can fly, it will leave South Africa because it will figure out ways to go work elsewhere. So my great dilemma is that inflation target at 3% may seem like a good thing because it follows international benchmarking, but it will have a problem when higher interest rates kick in because the band is low. Now, the minister says, of course, there's an adjustment of 1% on either end, except we are heavily reliant on supply side economics. And ultimately, for a business, once interest rates are up, you don't borrow money, you don't invest, you don't do all of those things. So for me, that is one that I put not with this big red light, but rather with an amber light or an orange one to say we've got to watch this thing carefully. Then some of the difficult things is that I still maintain that our budget doesn't respond well to the brave cuts that we need to make. Now, you've referenced the ad hoc committee. I couldn't help but laugh when the Deputy Minister of Police came to the commission and in answer to the question, what work has the Minister of Police given to you in the last year? The answer was none. Now, if someone says that, aren't they the classical ghost worker? Aren't they the people showing up at work doing nothing? So in essence, why do we need deputy ministers? That's a 3 billion rand savings you could put towards education, you could put towards healthcare. There are underpinning cuts that are happening in some of the frontline services, which are deep concern for me. In the whole budget, the minister did not mention once crime. And for me, when I say, what is the brave call you want to make? I would cut deputy ministers. I would cut agencies and SETAs. 177,000 people work in those places. None of us know what they do, and none of us know what the delivery of that is. And then I would really be far more aggressive at funding crime, because if you want investment to grow, you want to make sure citizens are safe. So the bottom line is this. It's a budget of tinkering on more of the old and some good tinkering, if you'd like. But what the budget needs is brave reform to think about how do we do policing better. And if it means that we have to decentralize some of the police functions, let's do it. It's the brave call of saying we can't have a cabinet the size that we are. Let's cut it. It's the brave decisions that say if we adopt TARs, which is what they've put in the budget statement, which are adjustments to spending reviews, but let's not just do small tinkering. Let's cut out ministries that don't work. In the economics cluster alone, you've got so many ministries, I don't know who's responsible for what. You've got the Minister of Labour, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Mining, the Minister of there's small businesses. There are so many ministries that deal with the economy that I'm frankly a bit baffled sometimes. Who is the person who, when the economy tanks, we can go back to them and say, you are responsible? But when there's a whole cluster of people who do more or less similar things, I would argue that we need the courage to really reform. And I don't see it.
Yeah, because the finance minister did make mention as one of his achievements that working together, they've somehow made it easier to do business. Do you perhaps know, perhaps from a parliamentary idea, what the hell he was talking about? Because I'm in the real economy and I haven't seen one change that's been made that makes it easier to do business, but yet he was putting that forward as a win. And I don't know what he was referring to, because he was saying that they've streamlined processes, all the usual buzzwords. Do you perhaps have any inkling? I mean, you're in there, you probably see him with his hat off. Do you know what he's referring to? Because nothing that I have seen has made it easier to do business, but yet he touted that as a win.
Well, I think some of it comes from the statement that was made by A.D. Eindhoven, who I respect and have um, admiration for. And A.D. Eindhoven made the statement to say that on logistics, and there's been a lot of work that's gone into logistics to make it easier to import and export goods. And of course, last year we've had the lowest amount of load shedding we've had. So those inherently as business contributors have become significant wins, if you like. If you want to run a business, it's helpful to keep the lights on and it's helpful to have logistics working. Where I think I haven't seen and I can't point to any evidence of this issue is, for example, SARS. The third opportunity that I think SARS are working on is that SARS are working on the single payer model, which is, Mike, if you're registered for VAT and you are in a company as a director and you get a pension, why can't we make you a single uh, payer so that we're clear what your tax liability looks like, so that you're not interacting with VAT and all of those different things? I accept those. So that's been piloted. But on the main, on business registration, water licenses, none of that has been done because the South African government has not spent a lot of money, has not spent a lot of time concentrating on what happens at local government. So at local government, your biggest issue is that, Mike, if you want to connect electricity to your business, that takes too long. If you want to get billed for your electricity, that takes too long if you're in Joburg. If you want to get water, sometimes that's a luxury. And if you're starting a business in the township, you don't have electricity, water, or even the internet. So all three of those things means you can't make payments, you can't do any of those stuff. So to me, I think on the economic front line, I'm not certain that we've been able to focus ourselves extensively on the things that we've got to do. And the GNU must account for that.
I would just caution anybody that thinks that we can take economic advice from the billionaire's son, who says how wonderful things have got as he lives in a mansion on the hill. Let's put that into context.
I would
Please.
that's your comments, not mine.
Nothing boils my blood more than a billionaire saying, listen, guys, things are getting way better. I've now got 3 Ferraris instead of 2. Thanks, 88 Eindhoven. Go back, enjoy your money. Go to the French Riviera or wherever it is you wrote that piece from. Just lastly on this budget, we heard a hell of a lot about PPPs, private-public partnerships. Thanks to Vulindlela, we're bailing out Eskom, we're bailing out ports, we're bailing out transport, etc. Great. When do we see a reduction in our tax? If we are being billed for 100% of the costs of Transnet, but yet they explaining the win that the private sector is in fact fixing it up, one would imagine that the state is saving a fortune. Do we, as taxpayers, start seeing a reduction in VAT or a reduction in our tax rates because of these PPPs? Because that obviously makes sense, that if the private sector is picking up the slack, that government must be spending less, therefore taxpayers should be paying less. Is that going to be part of your discussion?
Well, firstly, I think I don't anticipate that there will be a VAT reduction because the state, you are dealing with a government that somewhat I think is interested in and of itself rather than in sometimes the citizens. And so, even though I tout the fact that at least you might see a budget surplus, there's still constraints in as far as frontline services, right? So I don't anticipate that you will see a reduction in tax. I don't think the state has capability. In fact, for me, the issue at core is what tax incentives would you give? Like if I said to you, Mike, go start a business in uh, whatever, in Sandton or in Rosebank or in Alexandra, but I can give you a tax incentive for that. That does mean that I've got to shoulder the loss of whatever the tax is. But I'm interested in your ability to invest in that and employ people. But the state doesn't think like that because it's done the same. It's not going to do anything different. So when I think about next year, the only big opportunity that's happened is an overcollection on the part of SARS. In the main, growth projections for the economy is still at 1.1%, and population growth is near to 3. So effectively, what South Africa is telling you is that we're not growing fast enough to employ the people who are entering the labor market. So the bottom line is unemployment is going up, GDP growth is not growing at the rate to keep up with it. And for me, whilst all of these things are happening, I really believe the only instrument that the government has next year, it's not going to cut taxes. The only instrument is to cut expenditure. And I don't see an appetite for that. But at least they've set themselves up now to say, if they're targeting inflation at 3%, you can't give departments increases of 5% and 6%. That just is double the rate of inflation, as you have put it. Therefore, South Africa cannot, at least in some sense, we want to have departments that either way were not doing their jobs, but getting above inflation increases.
Well, Mmusi, we haven't even had a chance. We saw the collapse of the national dialogue. We're now seeing the collapse of the G20, which is down to about the G15. All of these passion projects, ego projects of the president are costing us a lot of money. It looks like this one is going to be a failure, but the difference is we're going to be in full glare of the international media. Johannesburg is still the mess that it was 6 months ago, despite some effort. It's hard to see where it is. I presume it's just a failure and we can't wait for it to be over. I don't know. That's my reading of the situation. Yours?
I'm waiting for the 1st of December to understand what South Africa is going to hand over to the US because that date is coming. I don't, sometimes these multilaterals all over the world, whether G20, AU, the UN, all of these institutions need reform. I really do think they need reform. What for me is the big takeaway is that what the G20 has confirmed for me is that we've not successfully managed to strike a deal with the US. The US isn't coming, and our US South Africa relations are not getting better. And that should concern all of us because it's broader theme. If you don't get the US relations right, it's 500,000 jobs potentially. If you don't get these things right, it's underfunding on our health budgets. And if the tariff conversation continues, we're going to have renewed problems. Now, fair enough, there are a lot of people that say, well, you can sub the US with other economies. But with respect, you can't sub the US with Kazakhstan and Vietnam. And it doesn't matter how many you try and put in. It's not that that effort isn't necessary. You've got to do the same effort. But in essence, the US is a worrying space for me. So let's get an ambassador there. Let's do that. Because all of these ceremonial events, G20, COP, climate change summits, and all sorts of that, for me, are nice, they're interesting, but they matter less until you do the hard yards. And the hard yards have to have been happening. So I'm worried that we were told after the famous Washington meeting that listen, the president of the US will be here, etc., etc. I don't see him, and that worries me.
Well, perhaps in the absence of President Trump, we can do a deal with Xi Jinping. Oh, sorry, he's also decided not to come. So good luck. This is a national monologue part 2. Mmusi Maimane, we've got a lot to catch up. We're going to need to do part 2 next week. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're under the gun. Thank you to everybody that joined us here on the Political Insider. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see you again soon. Mmusi, thank you for joining us.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much.